welcome everybody to this evening's webinar with Marilyn Schlitz on Grateful Aging, Awakening to our third act, the Grateful Aging program. And I think probably most of us here are in our third age, or the age of active wisdom, as Nora Bateson calls it, which I think is a wonderful phrase. We can actually draw on our life experience to be of service to other people. And it's a delight to have my old friend Marilyn here this evening, who actually first spoke for us, I think, at Beyond the Brain in the mid to late 1990s, because we were doing the Beyond the Brain with the Institute of Genetic Sciences in Cambridge. It started with Willis Harman and others in 1995. And Marilyn is very interdisciplinary because she's a social scientist, she's a parapsychologist, she's an anthropologist, and she's taught at many universities, and currently she's professor of transpersonal psychology at Sophia University in California, which I think used to be the International Transpersonal Association, but she can correct me on that. And she was president and chief executive of the Institute of Genetic Sciences, where she's now a senior fellow and visiting scholar at the University of California, San Diego, and founder of the Grateful Aging program. And we did have a meeting, which some of you will have been at, on the wisdom of elders and on aging about 4 or 5 years ago in Collett House. A few of you may remember that. And so this is a sort of revisiting at the next turn of the spiral. So I won't take any more time up. Marilyn, very warm welcome. Lovely that you're with us. And we had to move Marilyn inside. It was a wonderful view of an old golf course, but you couldn't see her face so well, and we really want to be able to see her properly. So over to you.
David, thank you. And thank you for all the amazing work you're doing in the world and how you're helping to awaken all of us to new sets of possibilities. So I really appreciate that. And I want to just do a shout out to the Scientific and Medical Network, because it has been an old friend and ally. And I have found both in terms of personal relationships and friendships, but also the sense of sort of the net that can hold us when, you know, the world feels rocky and when there are times when our worldviews are being challenged. It's nice to have the comfort of our mutual commitment to this kind of exploration. So I want to thank you, and, you know, big shout out to that history. I am here in Tehachapi, California, and I am surrounded by mountains in Southern California. It's a beautiful day here, and I am really, really delighted to be with you. I think I'll go ahead and start my screen share so that I can lead you through.
Just while you're doing that, Marilyn, I should have said that you're an honorary member of the Scientific and Medical Network. I should have added that to my introduction.
Thank you. And I have enjoyed several programs we've done in the last couple of months where we've been exploring post-materialist science, and then we did a program around death and the afterlife. Very stimulating and great participants, great speakers. So that was something else to say. Okay, here I go. Share. Here we are. All right, so this is what I am focused on in the moment, and it is the result of a long-term development in terms of my own work and interests, as well as my own life, and, you know, reflecting for all of us on the aging process. And I'm going to invite you, as we move through this presentation, to take some moments of reflection about your own experiences. When did you become aware of aging? You know, maybe it was when you were a kid and you wanted to be older. Maybe it's when you discovered you were older and wanted to be younger. You know, all of us have these stages in our life and opportunities, really, to reflect on what gives us purpose. My dog hears me talking in here, and I closed the door on her, so she's bumping her head. Maybe I'll let her in a minute. My own, I guess, awakening really came when my son, I was talking to him about, you know, did he want me to handle something related to his health insurance? And he's like, Mom, this is what adults do. I'll do it. And I was like, okay, I am now, fully into that next phase of, my relationship with him and therefore my relationship with myself. So, and by way of really opening this, I want to honor my friend and mentor, Claire Russell. And Claire was really a central figure in a lot of stages of my work. And in terms of the aging program, really an inspiration on how to be mindful, how to be grateful. And just the way she lived her life was remarkable. She would wake up every morning. She lived in a retirement community that she went to, and she lived in independent living. So she had her own apartment and kitchen. And she would wake up in the morning, and particularly starting kind of in her 80s, she would meditate, and in particular on her own mortality and her death. And she began her mornings with that kind of meditation, imbued with gratitude and a sense of intention. And then she'd get up and she would approach her day in a way that was extremely dynamic. She loved to walk on the earth with bare feet because she wanted the energy. She used to teach line dancing to people in walkers. And that was always to me such an inspiration to think about not only her, reminding herself what the steps were for line dancing, but, teaching these people who really were having difficulty moving, and yet they were getting out there and learning a new skill. So that was beautiful. She used to lead an Eckhart Tolle discussion group with people pretty much on phone. She would do it as a teleconference thing. And, she was responsible for a large succulent garden. You can see the succulents in this picture. So she was really a spirit of generosity. And to me, when I was doing various phases of my research, whether it was doing, parapsychology research on distant healing or subtle energies research, she was a big fan of subtle energies. And I think that was part of her whole worldview and model. When I did the Death Makes Life Possible project, I went to the Redwoods, which is where Claire lived, and that's where it started. I showed some clips. People gave me feedback. We had these rich and dynamic conversations. And from there, moved into this idea of grateful aging. So Claire really has been a great inspiration, not only to me, but to a lot of people. So let's talk about what's happening in the world right now. It is very clear that we are on an aging trajectory, and we have more and more people who are, from 60 on, moving into maturity. And this is something that, as we look at the demographics, we see that there are more seniors than children. And don't worry about your eyes if this slide looks a little blurry, because it is a little blurry. But this is something that is profound for many reasons. Certainly in terms of the ways in which social institutions are structured. Are we ready for this? Are we ready for this great movement of aging people? And one of the things that my friend Ken Dykewald has pointed out is that this is a powerful political and economic group, because there are so many, and because these are often people who have some financial stability. And so they represent, an economic bloc, a political bloc, and an opportunity to really challenge assumptions and recognize from their own worldview that this is time to revise our views of how people are treated. So I love this Mary Oliver quote: "What do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" And so just to pause for a second and invite you to think about that question. Whatever age you are, wherever you are in your life path, what do you plan to do with this wild and precious life, knowing that circumstances are changing, demographics are changing. With it, social institutions are being pushed to do different things. The impact for the workforce and the dynamics of who is this aging population in terms of what they represent. And I know that many employers are saying, you know, this is our most reliable population and we really don't want to lose everybody. And I think the COVID situation has caused many people to consider, you know, doing something different or doing what we do in a different way. So this is a beautiful quote, and I invite you all to just ponder that. So here we are, and we are conductors of our own lives, and we have this possibility to rethink how we are in relationship to our mental, physical, spiritual being, and our community involvement and our connections to relationships. So all of this is an opportunity for us to take all of those beautiful sounds that we've heard in the course of our life and to begin to pull them together in a way that is like a beautiful symphony. And I'll use different metaphors as we go along. I think metaphors are very powerful. So this is really our chance to revision our worldview on aging. And in particular, the Grateful Aging program offers some steps. And this is something that I'm developing in various forms, and I invite you to be part of that journey. I've been trying to weave together some various pieces that bring together humanistic, transpersonal, and positive psychology together with geriatric research that's happening on longevity. And so it's an evidence-based perspective that also is engaged with these transpersonal humanistic values. So as I said, I'll use different metaphors as we move along. One of the big metaphors that people talk about now is that it's a silver tsunami. And so I think it's poetic. It's beautiful to think about a silver tsunami. And yet when you dig into that metaphor, it's clear that it is about crisis and it's about, you know, disaster. So I think it's really important to rethink how we hold these concepts and how we can really invite in this idea of a wisdom garden. And as David said, you know, Bateson was talking about active wisdom. So how are we growing our garden as we age and transition to a new phase in our life? So I came up with this idea of transformation as it applies to the aging process. And I am really committed to transforming the fear and the terror that people experience around aging. And this starts early. You know, I'm actually taking an MBA right now, and one of the projects we just looked at was Procter and Gamble, and they have a product called oil of Olay. They just call it Olay now. And, you know, it was really clear they wanted to change the demographics. And what's happening now is that they have these younger influencers who are saying, you know, first of all, they're concerned about beauty products and aging well, but they have championed having Procter and Gamble get rid of touching up the face, you know, getting rid of the age wrinkles. Instead, they're advocating for an honest, transparent reflection on the aging process. And to me, this is a really hopeful sign that, you know, younger generations, the millennials, the X's are really also part of this conversation around aging. So it's not just people 50, 60, 70 and up. It really is our opportunity to reflect as a civilization. And one other thing to say is this trend demographically toward an aging population is global. It's happening everywhere in the world. And we're finding in some cases this is going to be a problem for countries like in Japan. They're experiencing a reduction in their population size. because fewer people are having children, or they're only having a limited number, and people are growing older. So again, this is something that is happening everywhere. It's a part of a conversation that we all need to be engaged in. And in particular, how do we transform this fear and anxiety into hope and possibility? You know, how is it that we're finding the impetus for us to age with grace and gratitude? So, you know, there are many ways to hold this, but a lot of this came out of my research when I was at the Institute of Noetic Sciences around transformations in worldview. And, you know, we did the Living Deeply book, and we conducted really a 20-year exploration into how do people transform. And, you know, one thing we know is it's hard. It's hard to shift our worldviews. And yet we have discovered in, you know, conversations, we solicited people who wrote to us. We got 2,000 people telling us stories about their own transformative journey. We used that to help invite in a group of transformative teachers and engaged in focus groups, drawing from the insights we got from people who had written to us. We then conducted interviews with 60 masters from different world traditions who were teachers of transformation, who believed that it is possible for us to shift our worldview. And then, you know, working on this, I applied it to the death and afterlife project that I did with Deepak Chopra, and now applying it here. So really the first question is about our awareness and answering the call to transformation. And how does that happen? You know, how do we shift our worldview? And I'll talk more about this, as well as some of the ways in which there are barriers to transformation. But again, I encourage you to think about what's calling you, and what were the catalysts that invited you to reflect on your life and the aging process in a new way. And it could be the loss of a loved one. It could be reflecting on where you are in your profession, and, you know, is there retirement or not? Is it some kind of change in your own physical being? Or maybe it was an epiphany that came from some out-of-body experience and your death experience, something that invited you to cultivate the curiosity. And so there are these 9 steps that we've identified, and I'm going to walk through them with you. And so this first one is shifting the worldview. And to me, worldview is fundamental to everything. And the interesting thing, it's largely invisible. Aren't aware that they have one, and yet it is that lens of perception through which we interpret everything. And so it's really fundamental that we gain a greater appreciation for the role that our worldviews play. They help us to make meaning. You know, we all have stories about our lives and our place in the world. As we grow and develop, these worldviews, even though they're largely unconscious, inform how we live, what gives us purpose, what we value, how we understand our place in the world and our relationships to other people. You know, what is it that gives us meaning and purpose? And that is very much influenced by this lens of perception, which is our worldview. And it is about transformation. I have had the privilege of raising butterflies and watching the little critters that are munching their way into transformation. They then go into the little chrysalis and, you know, hibernate. They metamorphize. They literally liquefy, so that they are in some ways self-destructing while they're reconfiguring and emerging as beautiful butterflies. And so this metaphor is powerful because it reflects on the fact that there's beauty and there's also pain. And this idea that we don't just transform simply, at least most people don't. Most people, even though it feels like there was one principal catalyst, find that it's incremental. I, in working on the Living Deeply project, had the privilege of conversations with Richard Gunther, who was a very successful businessman. And he had had a transformation when he went to the Esalen Institute, and he was standing on the deck looking out at the Pacific Ocean. And suddenly he had this unitive consciousness experience. And it was very profound for him. And it changed everything. It changed his relationship to his family. He became a leading philanthropist. It was very powerful. And so when he came to me, the question he asked was, is this weird? Am I the only person who's had this kind of experience? And if not, what can we learn about the transformative process that we can teach other people? And so that was really the beginnings of our project. And he felt very strongly that his transformation happened in that moment. And in truth, it did. But when you unpacked his life and began to look at the stages, he'd lost his mom to cancer. He'd had a cancer experience, which he recovered from. And he lost a granddaughter in a very tragic accident. So these things propelled him to actually be at Esalen in a Gestalt workshop, so that he had this shift in worldview. And so when we think about our own life journey, it's a really useful practice to map out, take 7-year intervals maybe, or 10-year intervals, whatever's comfortable, and begin to map out what were the transformative insights that happened at these various stages in our life development, and to really begin to reflect on how all of that informs who we are today. I love this little cartoon. I want to know the meaning of life. Have you tried Googling it? And it made me laugh because I was in preparing for this talk, getting on Google and looking up things like meaning. I thought, this is funny because, it's ironic and it's true. We are now a Google meaning-centered population. So many factors shape our worldview. And as we do this life mapping, should you decide to engage in that, you'll begin to reflect on what are the things that shaped us. Our biology, as we're growing and maturing and evolving physically, our temperament. Temperament plays a big role in how we view the aging process. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Our family upbringing, how were we raised and what were the values that were enforced for us? And maybe what were the values we rejected? Because, many people I find have had to break away from certain conventions in order to be able to move forward with their own individuation. There is this idea of culture. We are embedded in cultures that inform us, that shape us, that give us a language to express. When we think about metaphors, they're very much grounded in our environment and in our culture and our language. So geography, too, informs us. I used to teach a course on cultural ecology, where, it was really about how we adapt our societies around how we're embedded in the physical world. Religion, obviously, or our spiritual paths are very, very important. There are many other things that shape our worldview. These are just some of the dominant ones. There are various theories of development and how we, individuate, how we maintain our sense of wholeness, how we are beginning to find our way into the balance between our individual empowerment and the ways in which we are fundamentally entangled or interconnected. And, that can be part of the shift in our worldview. And so as we grow and interact with the world, we learn, we categorize, we discriminate, we generalize. We create things like stereotypes, like different ways in which we formulate opinions very quickly. These are based on beliefs and assumptions, attitudes, values, and these construct this kind of conceptual framework that trains our brains. So our brains are actually shaped by all these factors, and our brains lay down these neural pathways. And so as we construct all of these conventions about our life and these conceptual frameworks, our brains become habituated to that. They learn and they form these grooves. And so it's always easier for us to keep doing things that we've been doing rather than to break out of them. And the good news is that we know now a lot about neuroplasticity and the idea that we can create new pathways in our brain. And this continues throughout the lifespan. You know, there used to be that old, not very funny joke about you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But the truth is, we're finding from the neurosciences that we learn all the way through our lifespan, and our brains are responsive to that. So we can change our patterns. And then just, oops, I dropped my little headset. In the context of our times in this whole pandemic, how has that acted as a catalyst for us to reflect on what's important and who are we in relation to other people? I found this picture, which was really an honoring of the frontline workers. And many of them are of, minority status, lower socioeconomic classes, that are really the people out on the front line who, haven't had the privilege. So how does our awareness around that shift? I think for a lot of people, the pandemic has been an opportunity to become more reflective. For me, I know I've been living kind of the life of the monk, here in the mountains. I'm privileged because it's a beautiful space. I can walk in nature, but I'm pretty isolated. My husband and my dog, and that's basically the world. And then there's Zoom, which I'm very grateful for. And that has allowed me to stay really connected. But it's been a really profound period of time, for me personally, been very, very productive because I don't have a lot of the distractions. So I've gotten, papers published and research finished and research started and classes taught. So it's been good. But I think, really honoring that it has disrupted in many ways. And it has stimulated a lot of turbulence. And so I think this is a really important and dynamic time to reflect on what's happening in our world. So this to me is a really profound, important, and deep topic about, again, these worldviews and how they are driven by these cognitive biases. And these biases are not conscious. We're not really aware when we formulate a quick opinion. When we think of aging, is it failure? Is that a bias that is entrained in us that we are not even aware of? Or is it an opportunity? And so really recognizing that, there are many, many biases that influence our behavior. So when I talked about, personality and disposition, one of the things we see in terms of this aging process is the cultivation of a growth mindset. And again, some people are more inclined to have a limited or narrow mindset. And so they reject new possibilities or they say no to opportunities. But as this quote says, you're never too old to grow a new dream. So Carol Dweck has done some really amazing work on the growth mindset. This is probably hard to read because it's kind of fine font size, but she really looks at these two mindsets, the fixed mindset that views intelligence as static, and the growth mindset, which is the idea that our intelligence can be developed and it can lead to a desire to learn and a tendency to embrace challenges, to persist in the face of setbacks. There was an article yesterday about the founder of Kentucky Fried Chicken. And he started out as a complete failure. He failed at everything. And he got married and she left him. He got fired. He got another job. That didn't work. He started a company. It failed. It wasn't until he was in his 80s that he started Kentucky Fried Chicken and grew a $1 billion empire. So it is never too late. He clearly was able to stay resilient in the face of adversity, which is a big part of this growth mindset. And even, learning from the criticisms when somebody says something to us that might sting. What is the message? What is the lesson there? And also, what is our approach to that? Do we take it with a sense of compassion? Or do we take it with an adversarial response where, we ignore that person, we dislike that person, we resent their successes? This is an important concept. First, the worldview concept, then the notion of these cognitive biases, which influence what we see and what we don't see about the world. And then this notion of mindsets, and that, we're capable of cultivating a growth mindset. So this leads me to my third step, which is this idea that there is a practice. So when we were looking at the transformation project and living deeply, it was very clear from the teachers that there's nothing casual about transformation. It is a practice. It is a discipline. It involves a directionality. We're moving. And, one of the greatest things is, how do we recognize that our movement is both individual as we're developing our own spiritual path, our own intellectual path, but it's also collective and engaged. And so for each of us to begin to think about, how do we create for ourselves a practice? And, ultimately, recognizing the worldview piece, facilitating a curiosity, those are important steps. There's also this idea that, gratefulness plays a role. And as we begin to have reverence for all of life's lessons, as we engage this active wisdom, we can begin to recognize that gratefulness is, from an evidence, looking at the science, very nurturing to our health and well-being. So just something so simple as practicing gratefulness 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes 3 times a week, whatever it happens to be. Some people talk about having a gratefulness dinner once a week, where the intention around it is really to express what is working. And again, cultivating that growth mindset. And so that leads to step 4. And these aren't linear. These are definitely more like what would you call it? A Fibonacci spiral or a fractal that's kind of moving in on itself, and one stage influences another, and then we pop back to another phase. I only put it this way because it made it easier to communicate it. But by no means do I think of this as linear. And in fact, you could think that intention is step 1, because it takes our intention to begin to move us toward reflection. I'm intending to see the world in a way that informs me, that nurtures me. And I have the intention to reflect on my worldview. So intention becomes a very powerful tool. And yet there's that old expression, the road to hell is paved with good intention. So we know intention alone isn't enough. It really does require that we take action, and that we move in directionality so that there is some purpose toward something. Then there is this idea of attention. And this is very powerful. We see it in the spiritual traditions, to be sure, where, the idea is to move our attention toward perhaps it's mindfulness. Perhaps it's an engagement in nature. Perhaps it is a reflection on our worldview. Is the glass half empty or is it half full? And if it's half full, what are the possibilities in that? And how do we begin to recognize them? Going back to the idea of these cognitive biases, there's this phenomenon of inattentional blindness. And that is a very powerful bias and cognitive orientation where our culture, our society, our upbringing lead us to see certain things and not other things. So people probably are very familiar with the experiment of two basketball teams playing with each other, one wearing white shirts, one wearing black shirts. And a gorilla walks into the frame and stands there and then walks off. And because people have been instructed to pay attention to how many times the ball changes hands during the basketball game, many people miss the gorilla. They don't even see it even though it's right in the middle. And so sometimes you have to play it several times. Sometimes people get mad because they think you've tricked them and it has to be a different video. But the fact is that this is something that is within our cognitive biases that restricts our ability to see things. I spent time in the Ecuadorian Amazon working on a project looking at their dream sharing practices. And I was one day with a small group of Northerners. And Walter was our guide. He was Achuar and some other tradition, Shuar. He was a Shuar. And anyway, he stopped us and he got very excited and he was looking up at the trees. And it was like, what's the big deal, Walter? We're in a rainforest. There's lots of trees. And then we saw it, and it was these howler monkeys jumping from branch to branch. And howler monkeys represent survival for the Achuar. And for us, survival involves going to grocery stores. And so our cognitive framework was not built to perceive as quickly as he was this thing that represented survival in his culture. And so that's another example of inattentional blindness where we simply didn't see it because we weren't primed to see it, because our culture hadn't shaped us in that way. And ultimately, it was a transformative moment for me to realize that this was an example, that I had kind of taken for granted. So this cultivating of new habits, going back to our cognitive structures, the neural pathways, the neuroplasticity, all of this informs the possibilities. So with the glass half full, we can begin to think, well, what do I want to do next? And for many people, as they're entering their third or fourth acts in their life, are realizing that there are things they have wanted to do and they haven't done. And by golly, I'm going to do it now. And that might be a career change. It might be retirement. It might be taking up an art practice. It might be working in community. It might be visiting a monastery. There's many different things we can do. The point is to start it and to begin to do the work of the practice. This one, I think, is just a fundamental and very, very important piece, which is acceptance. And it's almost paradoxical with the concept of intention, because intention is goal-oriented, it's directed, and yet what we see in the path of transformation is that ultimately the world is just as it is. And what we have the capacity to do is shape our response to the world, not necessarily to change the world. And I think this goes with also that sense of our own mortality. And as we are aging, I mentioned about Claire Russell. Her meditation every morning was about her own mortality. And I had a conversation with Deepak Chopra recently. And, he and I did the Death Makes Life Possible film together. And so I was talking to him about something else. And he told me, he said, I meditate on my death every day. And I was like, okay, that's amazing. And don't go tomorrow, and yet he might. And so the acceptance piece comes with the willingness to be where things are. And I think that that is a huge part of the wisdom. And, that process of, knowing that we are here for a finite period of time. Gandhi said, live as if you were to die tomorrow. Learn as if you live forever. So this is really that paradox of the intention and the surrender held together with loving kindness. And then this idea of cultivating wisdom. We know from the neurosciences that, our brains act in different ways. There are different centers of control in our brains. And one of the things that they see as people grow older is that there is an increasing capacity for the integration of the two hemispheres of the brain, the corpus callosum, that can lead us to a wisdom brain. And so this is an opportunity for us to be able to cultivate wisdom, and to achieve this by reflection, critiquing our character and a judgment in these qualities of old age, that they're not poorer, but as we're growing older, are actually richer and deeper and more imbued with those yummy pieces that are part of a rich and nurturing life. Zalman Schachter talked about, moving from aging to saging, and he has a beautiful book. I have it right here. And it's worth reading. It's very poetic. It's very powerful. There's a whole network now that has grown up around the aging to saging movement, where people just are engaged in discussion together about this process of saging. What does saging mean as we become older? He talks about living between time and eternity. So rather than fixating on that chronological continuum, it's really this opportunity for us to think about how we are entangled in this broader sense of the universe, of the cosmos. One of the things that I'm astonished by every day is what we're learning from this space exploration and how they've just found these groupings of black holes, and they don't even have a name for it yet. NASA put out suggestions on, people donating possibilities for what do you call a grouping of black holes? Vacuous. They're a vacuous entity, what do you call it? Because it's really a nothing. And yet it's a something that's a very powerful force in our universe. This is Sophia. She's an android. And I had the privilege of interviewing her about a year and a half ago, I guess. And so I spent about an hour with her talking about everything. We talked about friendship. We talked about love. We talked about relationships. We talked about death. And she was so inspiring to me. And one of the things that she got me thinking about was the possibility that at the point of death, our consciousness can go to the event horizon of a black hole. And ever since that conversation, I try to meditate on that. What would that be like at that transition point, to be that infinite information connected to all of these, vast possibilities. It was very interesting. I wrote it up. It's published. It's on my website, marilynschlitz.com, under my writings. Just what my experience was of being with her. When I walked into the room the first time before the day I interviewed her, they were putting her away. And so, she dresses really nicely and she's beautiful. She's got a Sophia Loren look. And they were taking her apart. They were undressing her and, getting ready to store her in her box. And it was almost like this very bizarre, sexy encounter with an artificial intelligence. It was like I wanted to look away, but, I was fascinated. And it was extremely interesting that there was this sort of semi-permeable territory between what was this agency of an AI and what it means to be human. So anyway, I learned a lot, and a lot of people have tried to limit my experience, I'll say, by reminding me that she's programmed. She's got algorithms in her, and she's not really, human. She's not really thinking originally. But the truth is she's learning, and she's learning all the time. And there are a number of Sophias out there. And so they download to a central information bank. And so she's very dynamic. And, if you look her up, you'll see she's been engaged in some debates, and she's very famous. She's been on every major television show. And anyway, I just loved her. So this is step 9, and I think this is probably our most important step. And I will speak to my own life experience here by saying that, I have been very active in my career and, conducted lots and lots of research and published lots of papers and been to many, many conferences. And one of the things that's been most beautiful to me is I'm now a teacher. That's like my full-time job. I teach largely PhD students at Sophia University. And just this quarter, I've started teaching some undergrads. But there's this generativity of giving back. And so one of the things that, you'll get from the Zalman Schechter's work is really this idea that we can become those mentors. We can go out and volunteer. One of the things we see is that the act of volunteerism is health promoting. The giving of love and wisdom to others empowers ourselves. It helps us to create that meaning that propels us into the future. I mentioned Ken Dykewald at the beginning, and this age power or the blue wave is something very important. And as people feel that empowerment, feel that volition around our sense of purpose in the world as we grow older, there is this gerontocracy that can develop. And so, we find that if we look at the international agencies, World Health Organization, the UN, there are a lot of efforts now to think about our aging population and to begin to think, what are the needs that are important for the future? And some of these efforts are very simple, like making the streetlights longer on the green so that people have time to walk slowly across the street, or putting benches up in city spaces so people can walk and then rest if they need to. So these are kind of the aging cities approaches where people are really trying to bring awareness, bring physical actions, and also inviting congregation. One of the big opportunities, I think, now is this intergenerational dialogue. And we're finding that there are, young people who really want to engage with the elders. They want to be in collaboration. One of the activities that I find most inspiring, I think it came out of Sweden, where, they have these intentional living environments. And ultimately, this is something that I'd like to move toward, is having people of different age and generations living together. And maybe the young people pay less for rent than the older people, and they do more of the work. What was the expression from Nelson Mandela? He had everyone every day do this prayer. And it was, May we take care of the children, for they have a long way to go. May we take care of our elders, because they have come a long way. And may we take care of those in between, because they are doing the work. And that's a beautiful kind of circular wholeness that we can hold when we think about how we engage in multi-generational, multiracial, multi-gender, dialogues and engagements. I'm hosting an event next week. It's open to the public. I think it's next week. At Sophia on the Asian American experience, because there have been this rash of hate crimes and diminishment of people of the Asian tradition, because they're associating it with the Chinese virus thing. And so we're going to have a dialogue with three women who are a couple of them are psychologists, one is an actress and social activist, really kind of going into, from a transpersonal perspective, how do we approach these challenges of worldview and our intolerance, and again, those cognitive biases that limit our capacity to see our interconnections. So next steps, I am doing trainings. I started something called the Stallion Springs Academy. And so I'm offering self-paced online courses. This is all available. You can get information from my website, just my name, marilynschlitz.com. So, doing trainings on worldview. I have a course on Death Makes Life Possible. I will be launching a course on the Grateful Aging program in the next week or two. So stay tuned. And if you visit my website, if you want to sign up for my mailing list, I can keep you posted as things are happening. One of the projects that I'm involved in right now is called the Psychomantium. It is a sensory deprivation procedure for processing grief. And it is an invitation based on a very ancient practice of mirror gazing, or gazing on a reflective surface. And Raymond Moody really introduced it to kind of the Western psychological community as a way of processing grief. And so you have a completely darkened room with an illuminated mirror, and you're invited to begin to engage your active imagination, to have those conversations you've never had with those people who may be departed. And what we've done with that is to create a virtual reality experience. So in addition to a physical chamber, which we've pretty much completed our data collection for, we also created this virtual reality experience. And so it's kind of a progression of immersion into these, altered states, as it were. And so one of the things that I did as a result of COVID is I had to close down the lab. And so the VR piece, first we did little pop-up chambers. And so people were doing it in their homes and filling out our paperwork before and after so that we could actually collect data. But we've also now got this VR piece, and I will be sending that out to people for participation in the experiment. And so again, if you just put your name on the mailing list on my website, I will be sending information about that. And so that's kind of the major research project. We just received a grant from the BL Foundation, which we are extremely grateful for. And then another project that I'm looking into is this idea of reverse aging. There's a woman named Ellen Langer. She's a psychologist at Harvard University. And she actually has done some studies where it appears that if you put some people, she took a group of men who were in their 70s, and she created an environment that was 20 years earlier. And they stayed in that environment for almost a week. And she looked at psychological and biological changes before and after, and found that people seemed to show an age reversal. So we're now trying to adapt that idea to a VR experience and see how we can look at this process of reverse aging. And I think if we can show that, it's fairly revolutionary. Okay, so this is Jonathan, and I'm going to end with Jonathan. He is 188 years old. He just had his birthday, so happy birthday, Jonathan. He's a huge land-based turtle, and he is considered to be the oldest person, or oldest living creature inhabiting the planet. And so more power to you, Jonathan. May the force be with you. So here's my email address, my Twitter. As I said, my website, marilynschlitz.com, lots of great information on there. And I really appreciate your attention, and I very much look forward to our conversation in the next section. So I will stop my share here. Here we go. All right, David, back to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Marilyn. That was a wonderful encapsulation of these 9 steps, and you know, taking us through this reflective process that to think about these things from our own point of view and our immediate family and so on. So I think that's extremely valuable, and I'm sure a lot of people will want to follow this up, and we're going to be having some discussion in the second half of the event. I just wanted to show people, I reviewed this a few issues ago. This is part of a series that comes out of Princeton University Press of Latin manuscripts. In this case, it's How to Grow Old by Cicero, who you actually quoted.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of quotes from Cicero, which I thought I'd share here. And the first one is this: the best end of life comes with a clear mind and sound body, when nature herself dissolves the work she has created. The right person to take apart a ship or a house is the man who built it. Likewise, nature best brings an end to a person she has so skillfully put together. A new building is hard to destroy, but an old house comes down easily. Which I thought was rather a charming analogy. And then this is right at the end of the book. He said, if we are not immortal, nonetheless, it is desirable that we should die at the proper time. Whereas nature has set the boundaries for everything else, so too she has set the limits of life. Old age is the final act in the play of life, very much following up your own analogies here. When we've had enough and are weary, it's time to go. And he hopes the young friends who are reading this, may you both live long enough to see it and to prove by experience that the words I have spoken are true. So I thought that was a nice thing to put in. I'm just going to put one other thing in before we break. And this was, I don't know whether anybody on the call was at our meeting in Cascadia with Di Clift. And one afternoon, we went to a garden that had been designed by, or in memory of some Japanese who used to live on the island. And there was a quote above the door from Jokun, if that's the right pronunciation. I intended never to grow old, but the temple bell sounded. I intended never to grow old, but the temple bell sounded. And I wrote a short poem reflecting on this, which is called Alchemy. In the autumn of life, green turns to gold, grapes pressed into wine, wine distilled into the fire of spirit, forging crystal diamonds of wisdom, the fruitful treasure of fully ripened love. So just a little rather haiku-like contribution. So Peter.
Oh, thank you very much, Marilyn. That was a really wonderful talk, and I enjoyed it enormously. But all good things have to come to an end sometime. And so I want to talk to you about the end. And there are 3 questions for you. They're all the same question, but they're put in 3 different ways. Do you think there should be programs where everybody should be prepared for dying. That's one. Two, if you've really had enough of living, should you be able easily to get your physician to snuff you out? And the last one is, there are some interesting mental states which occur during the dying process, which can be simulated in many ways by injecting ketamine. So should we, in fact, inject our old people who are coming up to death with something like ketamine so that they can get an experience of what's going to happen? Compare Aldous Huxley and LSD. So I'd be interested in your views.
Thank you, Peter. I'm so glad to see you always. That mirror that you have behind you, it just makes me think of the psychomantium. I love that mirror because I've seen it a couple of times when I've been on programs with you. So that's fantastic. Obviously you are the pioneer in this domain. So I probably ought to turn it all around to you and say, what do you think? But before I do that, I believe that, raising awareness, this death awareness idea is very powerful. And I think that as people engage in conversation and, something like my film, Death Makes Life Possible, we created a study guide and everything so people could engage in deep conversation in a safe setting. And I think that that's been very powerful for people. And, I'd like to see that facilitated more and more. There are the death cafes and there's the dining with death. And there are a variety of programs now, including, your masterful work out in the world that is really helping to raise awareness and inviting, the deep conversations. So that's beautiful. I am a complete advocate for mindful dying. And it is just a travesty that everybody doesn't have that option. I know that I had a friend, Daryl Bem, his wife, Sandra, these were two very leading, prominent psychologists. And she ended up getting Alzheimer's. And she had said to him, when I can't remember who's the mother of my daughter, I want to transition. And they did everything. They went and talked to the governor. They talked to the attorney general. They did everything to set in place her ability to take her own life when the time was right. And she ordered a little packet from Mexico and she had it there. And one day it happened. She couldn't remember the mother of her daughter. And she said, it's time now. And so they had the whole thing mapped out. Not everybody in the family was on board for this because, there's a lot of grief and pain and separation. Got written up in the New York Times. I think it was a cover story. Beautiful process that they went through. And I am a huge advocate that it's part of our liberty to be able to decide at what point that happens. And it's unfortunate. And maybe this is going to be one of those political changes that happens as the geriatric population increases. And then you asked about mental states. Well, this is where, again, I'm going to turn it back to you because your stuff on the deathbed apparitions and, that really empowers me when I think of some of the case collection stories that you've amassed. And, the idea that people, see someone coming to greet them and that's Absolutely. A fairly consistent thing. Yeah. What an amazing process. And so just, you talk about ketamine, but, there's a lot of really interesting work going on now in the States. This is kind of having revitalization around psilocybin and a little bit of the LSD work and ketamine. So, being able to help people shift that worldview so that they feel more courage and more sense of possibility for what, that event horizon of the black hole or whatever it happens to be for people.
Yes.
So Peter, what do you say? What are your responses to your own questions?
My responses are that I'm a little divided about whether we should be able to turn ourselves off, because I think the process is so well looked after which you've described very nicely, the relatives coming for you, the gradual change and so on. But I mean, one has to accept that some people may not be able to do that, in which case it would be kinder to let them go the way they want. With regards to giving drugs, I'm all for this. So if people come up and say, listen, what's dying like? I'll say, just come with me into the next door room and give them a little shot of ketamine. And then, or psilocybin, if you like, and then say, well, that's part of it. And then be prepared to assist them with the other bits of giving up that they have to do as well. So it's a
I would
sort
think
of
virtual
mixture.
reality might be something too. You're making me think that that would be, if we took some of your case studies and created an immersion experience, you know, that's another alternative to exciting their imaginations.
That would be absolutely excellent. In fact, it's such a good idea. I shall steal it.
No, let's do it together.
Together.
You and me, baby.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So Tuvi, you're next up.
Yes. First of all, Marilyn, thank you very much. I hope you
Good
still
to see
remember. Yes. We haven't, I haven't seen you for sometimes in a real, not just virtual. I mean, I think the last time was one of the conference of the SMN that you came to London, I think. It was the last time. So a few things. First of all, you asked about the virtual reality of, and just to let you know, we started to do it, and we work on this project for more than a year to create virtual reality of near-death experience, which is preparation for this. We'll be happy if you want to continue this project and to do something together, not just about the virtual reality. I believe it's a full program to make something interactive for people to prepare themselves, but not just for the death. Because I must admit that session a bit later, because I was busy, and I realized from your talk bias and contradiction between the two things. On the one hand, and also from the question here, on the one hand, I really believe that that this life is also part of something much longer journey. Doesn't matter, we don't know exactly what happened after it, but it's not the end. It's just part of something interesting. On the other hand, I myself doing everything people ask about reverse aging. I don't want to reverse aging. What I'm doing, I'm slow the process from the beginning. So I try all the time to be healthy and to have all the healthy lifestyle that we can have, including the mindset that for me, I'll be honest, I'm normally I don't want to disclose it. I'm now about 72 or close to 73. And but I feel that I'm in my 40, 50, okay? And this is my mindset. So I'm doing a project, I'm starting new project all the time. And for me, it's a mindset that I keep, that I've got a lot of important mission, like with the SMN. I feel that SMN, after 50 years, almost 50 years, we're now starting the life of the real SMN. Before it was just internal for 1,000 people. Now we're starting to reach the world. And this is, I can see, it's a mindset about the future, and not just about the past. So I believe that this contradiction that I feel, and you have to find this balance, not just to feel that we go how to end the life, but on the one, how to continue to both enjoy life and contribute to the people, to continue. It's part, for me, it's part of the, and I don't contribute reverse aging, but to keep our young spirit all the time. And I will be very happy to collaborate with you to create some project together about this.
So a couple of things. First of all, I have wanted to collaborate with you since the first time we met. So yes, and we'll get Peter on it, and we'll all collaborate together. And I am happy to do that. I would love to do that. So just follow up with me, an email or something. And I want to thank you for articulating your own contradictions, you know, your own feelings of it's this and that, and I'm both and I think that that's so healthy, and I think it's liberating because, you know, we don't all have it all figured out, and some of us do, but most of us don't. And so I think, you know, recognizing and honoring and holding our own paradoxes is super healthy. And I think it's even healthy to play with them and toy with them and see, you know, what's this or that. I do think your idea of, living healthy, one of the things they talk about is hanging out with people who are different from yourself. They're younger maybe, or they're involved in a field you're not familiar with, or they're not just the same people, because it pushes us. And I think that's where, we talked about language.
We're doing that. I'm doing project, and we've got young people. Now we're starting project about people, part of the team that you invite is people between age of 10 to 18. They're part of the project. It's part of the advisory board, because it's project for, and I thought such contradiction complement each other to have program about young people, how to live properly as a young people, and then the old people. So this is again, all this is projects that you have to be involved.
Yeah, you're inspiring, and bring them together. That's the point,
exactly, yes,
bring them together. Yes. Good, thank you. And I look forward to hearing from you. We'll continue this conversation.
Yeah, thank you
very much. I did an intergenerational program around World War I. And so I got grandparents and grandchildren to work together on a project, putting together some, in many cases, family stories about World War I, and people who had, and so that was that, and they loved it, because it meant they were able to have significant conversations about things that matter, whereas a lot of its family interaction is just functional, isn't it? So
yeah, that's really good. Yeah, that's really good with the point. I think that I had a project where I was training young people, high school students, to interview elders, and it was giving them like the journalism skills, but it was also engaging that conversation. And you aren't calling me old, are you?
Wise. I'm a
there we go. I'll go with that.
we're all depends on how you define things, and we're all elders. I think it's better.
That's right.
Well, many of us are elders, and I like that term a lot better. It has connotations. Mm-hmm. Well, Marilyn, thank you so much for a very illuminating evening, and I think what we benefited from really is your own deep thought and research into these topics, and not just death and dying, but also living, and how best to live, through the third act or the fourth act, or whichever, maybe the fifth act even, and stay fully engaged. And I think, for those who are finding life challenging, then this lesson of gratitude and acceptance is a very profound one. And I was moved. I don't know whether anybody else has seen this week, but I got a message from Jeff Foster, who is a non-dual teacher, and he's obviously been stricken at the age of 40 with an appalling condition, which has debilitated him mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And so we just never know. I mean, we can be proactive in our attitudes, in our practices, and everything. I think it's the best we can do, but to be ready to for circumstances changing, sometimes in drastic ways, but that's really where our spiritual practice comes in crucially, and people often say that when you're coming through the gates of death, then your spiritual practice, says in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, so really all that matters. Because you're prepared to move through into these different states of consciousness, and then accept and surrender and let go at the right moment. So thank you very, very much indeed for being with us.
And David, thank you. But let's just end with something that builds on what you just said. And so I want to invite everyone, when we turn off our computer right now, just to sit for a moment in gratitude and really reflect on all the richness and all the different senses that you might experience that. And in that process, I wish you, a great rest of your day.
That's very beautiful. And I was going to read a story, but I won't now. Well, maybe I will, but
go ahead.
Let's return. And this is a story from the recent book by Bernie Siegel, which I've reviewed in the issue that's it's nearly in press at the moment. And this is a book called, let's just check, No Endings, Only Beginnings. And it's a story about elderly resident confined to a wheelchair, been confined to a wheelchair, for quite some years, and asked the nurse if she thought God really forgives you for everything, even that she had stolen and sold her parents' silver so she could afford to get married. And the nurse told her that God would forgive her. The next morning, the nurse discovered that the woman had come out of her room, walked the length of the hall with no assistance, put her teeth and Bible on the nurse's desk, and said she wouldn't need these any longer, after which she went back to her room and died. Extraordinary. And so forgiveness and working through this, I mean, she must have been gnawing away at it again to give her a hard time, for that. And I'm sure we can apply that. So let's just take a moment of silence together to reflect on what we've heard and how it addresses our own concerns. And then we'll say goodbye to each other and follow up your suggestion of sitting a little quiet time after we log off. So let's have a moment of silence together. Be grateful for the time that we've spent. So many thanks to everyone. See you all again soon.
See you.
Take care.